What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Mindful Muscle podcast. We got a Q&A today with Jake. Every Thursday we do Q&As. It's a good time, and we answer questions from clients, people on social media, and people in our Mindful Muscle Facebook group. So if you are not in, be sure and join. We are about to launch a Mindful Muscle 8-week challenge. Details are going to be in the podcast, but definitely in the Facebook group, and it's going to be something that is right in time with it being spring. We got summer coming up, so be sure and join the Mindful Muscle Facebook group. Link's going to be below in the description. You'll be able to get first, just the details, be the first to know what it is going to include. And super excited because I did this one last year, and we're just going to revamp it and reiterate and make it better. And that was already great. So super excited to do that. Jake, what's going on, my man? How's the week been?
It's been good. Just got back from Colorado skiing in Winter Park. So, like I was telling Paul before the podcast, it's been busy, but it's been good. And happy to be back podcasting, helping people out with their questions, and happy to be here as always.
Absolutely. I have a confession to make. Last night I went to John Mayer. He's incredibly talented, probably one of the best guitar players of all time. I was kind of underwhelmed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it because, what do you think was behind that?
I just find his music very monotone.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to like a raging concert by any means.
Yeah, it wouldn't be high energy. And here's the thing, I come in having usually gone to either festivals or raves or a lot more like intense BPM. And so you could easily just be like, Paul, maybe try appreciating blues and classic rock or just like regular music for once. And like, don't get me wrong, I totally get that. I think for me, I just like to have some form of variability in terms of like high energy songs, low energy songs. And I couldn't tell the difference between a single song. And like I knew some songs and some of the songs were fun, but that was my experience. Went there last night with a couple friends and
Whenever I think of John Mayer, did you ever watch the Chappelle Show?
mm-mm.
He was on this really funny bit where he basically just goes and I don't know, it's some bit about like white people dancing, and he goes and plays guitar in random places and people just start dancing. I don't know. That's what I always think of when I
Yeah,
when I think of John Mayer.
I gotta check it out. He had some long hair. It reminded me of Wyatt Langmore from Ozark. So
Oh yeah, I saw that on your Instagram.
yeah, that's my 2 cents on John Mayer. He's incredibly talented, great dude. Not for me musically. So I'm sure we've already lost some people who are like, "What? That is blasphemy." John Mayer is a treasure to the planet. So with that, Jake, hit me with the one random question, then we'll get into 4 client questions for the Q&A today.
Okay, so to start out this week with the random question, I want to know what, Paul, is one movie that you've seen more than any other movies?
Cool. So the quick short answer would be anything Star Wars related, but that's just this like big broad term. So I actually want to pull it back. And I want to say that my answer for this is Gladiator, just because anytime it's on, I stop to watch it and I'll go out of my way to watch it. And I would say
Mm-hmm.
it's my favorite movie of all time. As much as I love Star Wars, The Gladiator is something that is just for me timeless and classic. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll watch it 100 years from now with my kids at age
That's
130.
there's this podcast I listen to sometimes called The Rewatchables, and that's the premise of the podcast is they just go over like what are the most rewatchable movies and the things that make them rewatchable. And that's their point, is like these aren't necessarily the best movies, but they're those movies that like if you're flipping through TV and you see it on, you no matter what scene it is, you're just like, oh yeah, I gotta watch this.
Yeah. It's I still don't believe that it's going to end how it ends. Every time I watch, I'm convinced that he's going to escape and go be with his family.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't happen.
For
What
me,
about you?
and again, like I think contextualizing this question, like these are definitely a couple of my favorite movies, but they're not like quite my favorites. I think the reason I've seen them so much is because I got to start watching them at an early age. Like a lot of the rated R movies that are my favorites, I obviously didn't watch till I was like an older teenager or whatever. But it's got to be for me a toss up between Tommy Boy and Happy Gilmore. I've seen both those movies probably. I mean, I might be exaggerating, but it feels like 100 times. Like I know all the lines, and they're just movies that like I first started watching when I was probably 11, 12 years old, and I probably still watch them every year. I love both those movies.
Yeah, that reminded me. Wedding Crashers would probably be up there as well, just because that movie gets so much play on TV,
Hmm.
and that would
Yeah.
have been right in my wheelhouse growing
Yeah.
up. Happy
It's
Gilmore's a
weird.
good one.
It's weird because we're kind of like, I mean, people like 5, 10 years younger than us probably wouldn't even understand that concept of like movies on TV, because nobody really watches TV anymore. But that was all things like FX and TNT used to be, it seemed like.
Yeah, FX, TNT, USA
Some
Today,
yeah, some
TNT USA,
nostalgia.
nostalgia, good times. Might have to go watch those this weekend while
Yeah.
the first lady's in New York. I'm just home alone as a cat dad. But
There you go.
all right, listeners, let's get into your questions. Jake, hit me with number one.
Okay, so the first one here, I like this question a lot because I feel like there's a lot of knowledge to be gained from Paul and I talking about this, and that is how to get better at the squat. So, this is something that's kind of near and dear to me because I did spend like a year or two when I was probably 21, 22, just trying to figure out more about the squat. It never felt very natural to me because I have a different body type than most people. So, that was one of the things I wrote down here to bring up is that your form is going to look different for the squat depending on what your body type is. And so, for example, for me, I have really long legs and a pretty relatively short torso. So if you see me squatting, I'm going to have a lot more forward bend than most people. Whereas there's a type of person and a type of body type as well that is more so built for the squat. And when I say that, it just means that it's easy for them to just when they dip straight down, it looks like perfect squat form, and they stand straight up, and it makes it look nice and easy. And that's usually someone with shorter legs and a longer torso. So you have to think first and foremost about not necessarily what your form is going to look like and changing it to look a certain way, but just doing the things that feel comfortable to some extent. You don't want to ever try to force a round peg into a square hole when it comes to form with any exercises, because if you watch someone doing a tutorial on YouTube of a squat and their body type is totally different than yours, then it's not going to look exactly the same or feel exactly the same for you. So first and foremost, I guess just for a really clean and simple takeaway, which there's a lot of nuance to the squat, but the longer your torso is compared to your legs, the more you're probably just going to be able to sit down straight and stand up straight. And if you have a longer legs and a shorter torso, you're going to have more bend in your squat, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but you want to make sure that you keep your spine neutral and you're not rounding forward in your shoulders. And you want to make sure that you're staying strong in your back and stable. And then in addition to that, so I'll just go over the things that I was thinking about and kind of see, Paul, what you think about all this. But I have 3 tips that I think subconsciously think a lot about when I squat. And the biggest one for me is to break my hips and knees at the same time. So you can see a lot of wonkiness in the squat. If you bend your knees and then you start bending down and then you bend your hips, trying to think about bending both of those things at the same time is a good way to keep it clean and stable on the way down. When I'm at the bottom, I think about spreading the floor with my feet. That's a good way to keep your knees stable and stay strong as you stand up in a squat. And when I sit down and stand back up, another thing I like to think about is it should feel sort of like you're sitting down in a chair or just sitting down on the toilet, because that's a natural thing we already do. The squat is obviously a really important lift for many reasons. One of those being that we squat all the time in day-to-day life. So it's something that we're used to. It's something our bodies know how to do. So making it feel natural by thinking about something like that too. Hey, I'm just sitting down in a chair. How would I do that? Down and back up. And there's obviously a lot of nuance to it, but those are a couple of things that are really important for learning the squat for me.
Yeah. The question how to get better at the
I
squat.
guess I guess I kind of went totally off the rails there, but I
No,
think
you're
a lot of it just comes down to the form.
no, you're good. I was going to get into what my first thing when I see that question is how to get better at the squat. Squat more. It's like how do I
Mm-hmm.
get better at golf? Golf more. How do I get better at basketball? Play basketball more. So squatting more. Strength is going to be a lot of skill acquisition and neurological adaptation. So the more you do it, the stronger you'll get at it. When I see this question too, I think of the mobility that someone needs to have and every single joint by joint kind of checklist or diagnostic that needs to happen. So you talked about the feet. Well, you probably need to be in the right kind of shoes, whether that's barefoot, in socks, in flat feet shoes like a Vans, a Converse, a lifting shoe, a cross training shoe, something that's going to allow you to connect with the floor and almost grip like a tripod where you have your heel, your inner big toe, and your pinky and kind of grip the floor so that you can produce force into the ground. Then I think, okay, how are your ankles? Do you have good dorsiflexion? Because as you go down lower, those knees got to go over those toes, and that's going to create dorsiflexion. Then I think, all right, how are your knees? Are your knees good? Do you get proper lube and oil of that joint, and the muscles are stretched adequately, and you don't have any necessarily knee pain as you're doing those? And that could be tied to the hips. How is your hip mobility? Because ultimately what you need is you need knee flexion, ankle flexion, you need your feet to be able to really connect with the floor, then you got hip flexion, and then depending on how you're set up, you might have a barbell on your back, you might have kettlebell in front of your chest. There's going to be some shoulder mobility necessary to keep that bar racked on your shoulder. So for me, when I see that, I'm like, all right, you got to make sure that your mobility is good. And we have a bunch of different exercises that we can share within the Mindful Muscle Facebook group if you want help with that. But the ways to get better at the squat is to do the squat, but then make sure that your body is set up to do the squat that is best for you. That's my thought when I see that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this is, depending on what direction we went with it, it's seriously something we could probably talk about for an hour, because there's so much that goes into it. Like something I was reminded of when you're talking about having the joint mobility and just the joint health to be in the squat is, and I guess this is kind of off the rails, but it's just an example of how everything is so intertwined when it comes to your health and fitness. One huge thing that's going to help you with mobility and joint health is just being hydrated. So when you drink enough water, your joints are going to stay more lubricated. So if your squat feels really achy and your joints don't feel good, that could be a product of just needing to do more mobility, but it could be something else, like you're just not hydrating enough. Again, like it seems like every episode there's a good opportunity to bring up why it's important to have or work with a coach. And these are the sort of things that you parse out with a coach, figuring out how to address the issues that you're running into and get past certain breaking points. So with the squat, it's not only about just having strong legs. Of course, that's one of the biggest keys to having a good squat, but you also have to make sure you have the mobility and stability to express that strength in a way that's healthy and going to keep you injury free.
Yeah. The last one that I would add to this is really good bracing. So proper
Yeah, for
breathing
sure.
mechanics as you go into the squat. I've got a full training on this, and it breaks down how to breathe and how to brace. And so if you're listening to this, just drop a note below the Q&A inside the podcast, or shoot me a note on Instagram or literally wherever, and I can set you up with that. But I've had clients who are super shaky with their squat. I'm thinking of a couple right off in the last couple weeks. I introduced this bracing concept to them where you breathe in, big, forceful exhale, keep the pressure, or keep the air pressure within the spinal column there. Intra-abdominal pressures is what it's called. But that core stability then allows the mobility of the other joints to happen a little bit easier, and it leads to creating more tension and ultimately being stronger with your squat. So I've seen people reduce pain and get stronger literally by just incorporating proper breathing. So a
Yeah.
lot, and you're totally right. There's Squat University is a YouTube channel with millions of subscribers. All the guy does is talk about squatting. So you could talk about squats all days or all day and never get tired of the concept. Maybe get tired of the concept, but never run out of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I brought up those first three tips. Another tip I think about every time when I squat is a good way to think about the breathing and bracing is I don't remember where I saw this initially, but basically the idea was when you're squatting, it should kind of feel like when you're squatting, you're going underwater. So with the breath, you take one big breath, one really big breath, hold it, hold tight in your core. When you're squatting, you're essentially pretending like you're underwater. And then once you get back up, you totally release it, take in a new breath down, because you don't want to be losing breath at the bottom of a squat, because that's gonna make you lose a lot of your stability and your power. So making sure that you're holding that breath throughout, staying strong and tight in your core, and really pushing through that. One other really important note that came from something you said that I think is an important concept for people to grasp is so much of strength is skill acquisition. So oftentimes a 20, 30, 40 pound increase in your squat may not necessarily translate to that same proportionate amount of muscle gain that you might expect, because a lot of doing something like a squat or a deadlift is going to really center around just becoming more neuromuscularly tuned in and being able to use your muscles in the correct way and just do the exercise in a technically proficient way. So sometimes when you're gaining on a squat, it is just due to you're getting better at the movement. So just trying to make sure that people understand that as well. So when it comes to stuff like newbie gains, people talk about that a lot. Oftentimes, if someone's never lifted before, they might see 50, 60, 70, 80 pounds go up on their squat, but they're not necessarily going to see their body change in proportion, because a lot of doing something well is just becoming efficient at it, like I said.
Yeah, that's huge. Cool. Next question. How important is cardio?
Yeah, so this is another really interesting question, and I think something that people think a lot about. I know that in the past, I tended to believe that you had to do cardio to be in good shape, to get shredded, to look the way you want to look, that it was just a necessary component of any training program. And I think it's important to point out here that you could do no cardio and get down to almost single digit body fat, because most of how you look body composition wise comes down to your diet and having enough muscle mass that you have something to show off when you shred a lot of body fat. But with cardio, it's much more so, at least the way I look at it for myself and for clients, just a component of overall health and longevity. It's really not something that you need for fat loss. It can come in handy, because as you go and do some cardio and burn 3, 4, 5, 600 calories, yes, that's obviously going to help with your fat loss goals, but fat loss and body composition goals really can be achieved with diet alone. And that's the main component of it. So don't get too caught up in thinking that cardio is important for any body composition goal. Like I said, it's much more so just a component of your overall health and longevity.
Yeah. And I think this question opens up a huge conversation, kind of the same way about squatting. But the other way I see this is, how important is cardio? Well, it's super important for your cardiovascular health. So if you don't have healthy cardiovascular health, or that's something that you need to improve because you're a runner or want to run a marathon or a half marathon, well, yeah, then it's super important. But you can get cardio during your weight training, or you can get cardio through walking, or you can get cardio through running. Anything that causes your heart rate to elevate and stay there for sustained period of times, and depending on how you're training, you can be a little bit more fine-tuned with that. But thinking of cardio as just running limits you to all the different ways to get cardio. Swimming's cardio, rowing's cardio, walking up a hill's cardio, hiking's cardio, jumping on a trampoline is cardio, working out is cardio. Now, the tempo and the rate at which you do it is going to determine what type of cardio it is, and what energy system you're using, if you're looking at it from that way of looking at things. But I would say it's one of those things where the pendulum can sometimes swing so far where it's, you don't need to do cardio. Cardio is terrible. And a lot of people market it as, you don't have to do any cardio. Well, cardio is also good for you, and a good way to really improve and feel good mentally as well. Cardio, in terms of just the bilateral movement and being outside and getting fresh air, has a lot of benefits from a mental standpoint as well. And so I think the way to think about this question is, what is your goal? How does cardio fit into that goal? If your goal is to lose fat, cardio can play a role, but diet's the most important. If your goal is to run a marathon, your cardio is huge. You better have that tightened up. Otherwise, you're really going to struggle with that marathon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that the hyperbolic version of how I feel about this, like if there were like the clickbait title of my opinion on this might be something like, you don't need cardio. Cardio is totally overrated, which I don't think that. I include cardio in my routine, but I think that the importance that people might give it as far as just the general fitness population is they give it much too much credit as far as just why it's important and how it's important. So like I said, diet is going to be the main driver of fat loss, but most people out there are going to think, oh, I have to do cardio. I have to reach my goals. And so, like I said, the hyperbolic version of how I feel about it is it's really not important. That being said, I include it in my own routine, and I see the importance of having healthy cardiovascular fitness and the longevity component of that. But I think overall, like I said, just in the general gym culture, or the general just person trying to live a healthy lifestyle, probably gives a little bit too much importance to cardio. And again, that's kind of in the context of cardio versus strength training or weight training. That's highly underrated. And Whereas a lot of times people might do half to three-fourths of their exercise as cardio, just kind of guessing around the general population. It should probably be more so the opposite, where it's half to two-thirds to up to three-fourths weight training, strength training, and then maybe a fourth to a half of your exercise is cardio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. I think the cardio one is, it's a mix of like what you enjoy, what your goal is. It's also something that you can literally go do at any point, anywhere. You're
Mm-hmm.
traveling and you're like, I need to go work out. Sweet, go for a run. That's
Yeah.
ends up being cardio. So I think it's just make sure that you're thinking about it the right way in relation to your goals.
Yeah.
Next
And I
question.
think another just to add one more point is I think that a lot of people hate cardio. And another thing we've talked about a lot, we just talked about atomic habits on Tuesday. Another important component of reaching your goals and of setting healthy habits is don't include stuff on a regular basis that you hate. So if you hate going out and going for a 3, 4, 5 mile run and you think that that's necessary to reach your goals, know that it isn't. And there's things you can do to replace that. But again, speaking to your point, I think that there's a lot to be said for the mental clarity aspect of cardio. So if that's important to you, and if that's something that makes you enjoy it, know that you can include a lot of cardio and there is going to be a lot of healthy components. So just try not to, again, use the analogy of a square peg in a round hole. Always know that there's a lot of variability to what you can do based on your preferences and based on what you enjoy.
Definitely. Definitely, definitely. All right, question 3. My chiropractor mentioned that my mid back is really weak. He recommends working on mid back and lats more. Do you have any exercise or tips for this? And this is a question that I got just this last week from a client. And for a little bit of context, this was someone who is super fit, super active, and loves to work out. But when we initially started working together and doing an audit and assessment of what workout she was doing, there were a lot of Pilates, a lot of boot camp classes, a lot of yoga. And one of the limitations of those types of classes is the inability to really train the lats and train the mid back. And it's not that you can't do rows in them or that you can't do vertical pulls, but those types of classes, think of yoga, for example, there's no way to pull weight towards you. Everything is body weight. So unless you have a pull up bar, you can't pull weight towards you. In a boot camp class, there's a lot of squats, push ups, you can do some hinges, but you're never going to have a machine sitting in the middle of the class that's like a lat pull down machine or a 2 wide arm row. You might get some light dumbbell rows, but that ultimately leads to some sort of um, very little volume in the upper back area. And then you look at something like Pilates. Again, Pilates is great. There's a lot of benefits to that, but there's nothing that's going to really strengthen the back the same way it would maybe strengthen the legs or tone the core and whatnot. And so, in looking at her entire week and what she was doing from a workout standpoint, there was very little volume and training volume specifically to those muscles. And so, whenever I see someone coming into the program or anytime I look at my own program, I want to think about movement patterns. And this was a training that I did couple weeks ago for everyone within the E4 Fit method. If you want the document and the training, this can be something that we drop in the Mindful Muscle Facebook group. But I wanted to just go over the importance of movement patterns with you, Jake, and we can just talk through what all those different ones are. We actually covered one a little bit earlier today in squats. But when we look at multi-joint movement patterns, so that's multiple joints being active, you want to do squats, hip hinges, which would be like an RDL, hip extension, which would be a hip thrust or a kettlebell swing. Then you have lunges with single leg. So that could be a side lunge, forward lunge, back lunge. And that's just lower body multi joint movements. Then you have upper body multi joint movements. There's pushes that are horizontal. So that would be a push up, a bench press. Then you have pushes that are vertical. So that would be a shoulder press, pressing weight overhead. Then there's pull that is horizontal. So pulling weight towards you, that would be a TRX row, a barbell row, a dumbbell row, and then there's vertical pull. So that's a lat pull down. And I want to make sure that I've got at least 2 sets of 4 exercises or 2 exercises of 4 sets of each of those each month or each week rather. And if you're lacking that in your current class routine, then that's where you need to fill in with a day. And that's what we did with this client is said, okay, cool, 2 days a week, let's get you doing these upper body exercises so that you can find a little bit more balance and actually develop and build your lats and your mid back, your rhomboids, and help with the upper back shoulder posture.
Yeah. And I think that another thing that's important to note, another thing that I try to include in my own fitness routine is always try to include more pulling than pushing. And the reason for that is most people are going to be pretty anteriorly dominant, just meaning that there's so much in your day to day that is influencing your anterior muscles and the dominance of those. So, for example, when you sit at your desk, you're probably hunched over. When you drive, you're hunched over. So, there's so much hunching over and shortening of your anterior muscles that's going on. That strength in your back muscles is going to do a lot to help with your posture and help to counteract that daily lifestyle sort of posture and anterior dominance that we see. And then the other part of that is that there's so much more musculature in the back to train. So if you think about your anterior, it's your chest, your pecs, your delts to some extent, your anterior delts at least. And then in the back, there's, like you mentioned, the rhomboids, the lats, the traps, the posterior delts or the rear delts. There's just so much more muscular to train back there. So you have to think about the fact that it's really important to make sure that's strong and healthy. And another thing I think, especially that gets that's relevant for men, like I know that I've been this way in the past, where you can see your chest, you can see all the muscles on the front when you look in the mirror. So you might emphasize that more and wanting to train that more versus the back. It's not something that you see in the mirror every day. So it's easier to neglect something like that. So I think there's just so much to be said for really emphasizing pulling motions in your workouts and making those the priority over pushing movements for the most part.
Yeah, working the backside of your body is something that people will forget, but your glutes, your hamstrings, that's going to lead to good core stability, good hip stability, and not having issues with tight hip flexors. Your rear shoulders and working to your upper back is going to help with your shoulders. So if you got shoulder issues or knee issues or hip issues, this isn't to say blanket statement that's the issue, but a lot of times just strengthening the backside is going to help get your body more into alignment. And so just
Yeah,
make sure you don't miss it, people.
for sure.
Cool. Last question. What do we got here? Boom, boom, boom.
So last question here is, do I need to eat before working out? So another question with a lot of nuance and a lot of individual variance, but again, it's one of those questions where it really depends. And I would think, or I would suggest to a client that the number one priority or the number one thing that you want to think about here is, what do I like to do? What do I prefer to do? Again, is, I'll mention it for the third time, sticking a round peg in a square hole. If you don't like to eat before you work out and it makes you feel shitty, then there's no need to do that. And if you heard that fasted training is good for whatever XYZ reason, but you hate that feeling, you like to have something in your stomach before you train, then do that. There is no need to do one or the other. I think there is something to be said for have food around your training. So if you don't eat for many hours before you train, make sure that you're getting a decent post-workout meal in. You want to have something either before or after your training, but there's no reason to have to go into a workout fed. That being said, a lot of times your performance is going to be better. If you go into a workout fed, you're going to have more energy. But at the same time, for every person that feels that way, there is someone who just likes the feeling of training fasted and feels like they can kind of get more output and get more out of a fasted training session. So really just think about what you like and don't get fixated on doing something that just because you feel like it's what you have to do. Meal timing is not nearly as important of the accumulation of all the food you eat throughout a day and throughout a week. So don't worry about getting too fixated on that.
Yeah. Anytime someone asks this question, I think the important thing is to understand like when they're eating before working out and what they're eating. So let's just use
Mm-hmm.
like a morning workout, for example. If they're working out at 6 a.m., in order to have food at like or energy and like a quick bite to eat, it would literally need to be like half a banana at 5:30. If they have too much volume, there's going to be too much volume in the stomach. The digestive system, when it is in its sympathetic state, does not want food in there. And this is kind of like a gross example, but I think it's a extreme way to highlight this. When a snake gets stressed out or it is under threat, it'll regurgitate its food. And that's because it's under threat. And so to have a ton of food in your digestive system when your body senses threat, and again, it's not perceiving you doing sprints on a treadmill versus you doing sprints away from a bear. It's just like, I'm doing sprints. So your body is going to either throw something up or it is going to have crazy diarrhea if you need to expel that from your digestive system. Now, if it's just a little bit and your body's able to break down a simple sugar or just like a quick energy bar or even Gatorade, well, that's going to have enough time to get converted to blood glucose. And then that's what your body's using as fuel and as energy. And so if you like to have something right before you work out, make sure that you either give your body a couple hours to digest it. And that's why I use the 6 hour or 6 a.m. workout, because you probably aren't going to wake up at 4 a.m. and have a big meal. So having something really small could totally work for you. If you don't like having anything in your stomach, again, because people are more sensitive to having stuff in their digestive tract, then don't have anything. Make sure you hydrate, make sure you have water, but then eat afterwards. And with fasted cardio, you're totally right in that you're not going to see any more or any less fat loss. You do fasted cardio versus not fasted cardio, so long as calories are equated and macros are equated. But what you could also see is if you work out fasted, well, you're going to be a lot more hungry after. But if that's lined up with a big meal that you had planned, well, maybe that works for you. And so coming back to what you were talking about earlier, this is where it's helpful to have a coach to be able to help you see the bigger picture and understand, okay, I'm working out at 4 p.m. Here's when I should eat. Here's when I should eat after. I'm working out at 10 a.m. Here's when I should eat. Here's when I should eat after. Because meal timing can definitely help with performance. As someone who has eaten a bonz of pasta and spaghetti right before a half marathon, I can also tell you it can really impact performance in a bad way, right? And I know this, but if I go and have a high protein, high fiber meal and then go run a half marathon, well, it makes sense that I'm going to have a stomach ache. It's taking my body naturally a longer time to break down fiber, break down protein, but it's trying to do that as I'm running up hills around Seattle. So that's an example of when you wouldn't want to eat. So when you eat, what you eat definitely plays a role in performance and how you feel. But do I need to? No, absolutely
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. And this to me is another really great example of missing the forest for the trees. So if you were to look at a professional bodybuilder and you were to say, okay, what's the perfect thing you should eat before a workout? I'd say, well, you should probably have some moderate to fast digesting carbs, a little bit of moderate to fast digesting protein, a little bit of fat, not a lot, but for 99% of people, it doesn't matter. Like, for example, I would probably put myself in the top 5 to 10% of the fittest people, at least in America. And I will tell you personally, I never think about what I eat before a workout. I think it's important to me to get, like I was telling Paul before we were on here, to get 3 or 4 strength training workouts in a week. But if I can check off those boxes, that's 99% of my results. If I can think about maybe getting a decent pre-workout meal in before I work out, yeah, that might help me have like a 5% better workout. But so often, and it kind of feels like a theme of today, people are missing the forest for the trees. So when you look at people giving advice, oftentimes it is someone who's competed in bodybuilding, in CrossFit, in whatever. And this sort of stuff becomes important to them because they have everything else so dialed in. And a 1, 2, 3% improvement can mean the difference between winning and losing for them. But for the average person that's in the general population trying to live a healthy and fit lifestyle, you have to think of a thing I like to think about a lot is the 80-20 principle. What's the 80% that's going, or what's the 20% of things that you need to focus on that's going to get you 80% of the results? Daily and weekly macronutrients and calorie counting, or at least awareness of that and what direction that's going, getting your workouts in consistently. Those sort of things are what you need to focus on. And if you really like to, or if you really have the mental capacity and time to think about it and prioritize it, can pre-workout, post-workout meals help a little bit? Sure. Yeah, they can, but it's not going to be the majority of what's going to get you results.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the 4 questions. Any last thoughts? I think the forest for the trees is kind of like a good theme for today, where these are wide questions, and each answer is going to have its own context specific to the context of maybe what that person was asking or a deeper version of that question. But I think another way to think about it too is like, it depends on the person, your goals, what you enjoy. And very rarely should you ever hear someone say with absolute certainty, 100% yes, everything else doesn't matter. It's a funny quote from Star Wars, but it's only the Sith deal in absolutes. And in that universe, the Sith are bad people. So I like to say, like, only bad people say with 100% certainty something is 100% evil or 100% good for you.
Yeah. And I think another thing to note is that we could give cut and dry answers to these questions in a vacuum, but people's lives don't exist in a vacuum. So there's context. And there is a most optimal way to go into a workout. If you want to base it off 100% scientific studies, you should eat this and this. Sure, we could break that down, but nobody's life exists in a vacuum. So it's important to add context and to say, above all, what do you like to do? Because what you like to do and what feels good for you is going to help you to be consistent, and consistency in the long term is the number one thing that drives results.
Boom. Consistency, people. So that's the Q&A podcast. I do want to make sure that we round up a few things just from a housekeeping standpoint. So Fuller NutriFuel, if you want food delivered to your door, delicious, nutritious meals that save you money and save you time. If you're in the Seattle area, we got a Seattle-based company, Fuller NutriFuel. You can use my code Paul15 for 15% off your first order, Paul10 for 10% off your second order. But I've had so many clients take me up on this, and they are saving so much time and have so much more mental clarity and mental energy because it's a lunch or a dinner that they don't have to think about. And before you say, oh, that's so much money, I can't, swing it. Look at how much you're spending on DoorDash. Look at how much you're spending going out to restaurants. The average order is $39, which is a lot more than 11. So Fuller NutriFuel, that description's below. Definitely check that out if you're in the Seattle area. If you want access to being able to ask these questions for the Mindful Muscle podcast to different trainings around training, nutrition, recovery, and mindfulness, the Mindful Muscle mini course, you got a free recipe book, and we're going to be doing an 8-week Mindful Muscle challenge for the community. Definitely join the Facebook group. That's going to be linked below in the description as well. We go live in there every single week and just answer people's questions. And so definitely be sure and check that out. And then I think that's it in terms of housekeeping things. No, there's one more. If you want to be coached by us, the E4Fit method is the 16-week program that we take clients through. And that is something that if you want to really level up and optimize your training, nutrition, recovery, and mindfulness game, definitely take advantage of that because we are filling up fast and it is what some people would call life-changing. And that's taken from a couple clients that I talked to just yesterday and want to help you out. So if that's something you want to learn more about, definitely check that out. We got the link to that as well in the show notes. Other than that, Jake, I think that's all I got.
Yeah, check us out on Instagram. My Instagram is @jakeparker.fit. And we love hearing from you. If you listen to the episode, if there's anything you want us to expand on or cover in the next episode, that's the point of these podcasts. So make sure to have an interaction with us. If you're curious about anything, if there's anything you want to hear about.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul_Klingen is mine on Instagram. Leave a 5-star rating and review. Share this with a friend and subscribe. Other than that, we'll catch you guys next time on the Mindful Muscle podcast.